Reviewing Blade, the trilogy there, all three films, the legendary superhero film starring Wesley Snipes. This won our poll that we put up there. We're doing reviews of a lot of black films there for Black History Month, and doing films with black cast, black directors, that have black themes in them. So this was on a poll with Last Black Man in San Francisco, The Five Bloods, and Princess and the Frog. Put up Last Black Man in San Francisco for Jonathan Majors, obviously, for Ant-Man, and then also put up Blade because it's a superhero movie, and then we had a superhero movie come out very recently with Ant-Man. So this one, I mean, people sometimes forget about this one as being ushering the new renaissance of the superhero film. A lot of people point to X-Men, which came out in 2001, and then people point to, actually, no, X-Men came out in 2000, I believe. And then Spider-Man, which was Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, is pointing to those films as being like the big thing that kicked off superhero movies after Batman and Robin, which came out in 95, which basically just tanked all superhero movies. Everybody just, a lot of studios just completely just drifted away from superhero movies after that colossal failure. But, this came out, Blade, 1998, and big success all around. I know some critics at the time were kind of mixed on it, but financially it did very well. You had Wesley Snipes, had success, has trained in martial arts. He was in things like New Jack City, Passenger 57, Demolition Man, and he kind of, it was almost perfect casting as Blade. Even the look of him, Blade, who's a character that came around the kind of. It's funny that we also did a review for Black Dynamite as well, because Blade came at a time in the 70s where the blaxploitation thing was really big. With characters like also Luke Cage also appeared. So that was kind of the reason why Blade existed in the first place. So it was kind of cool seeing this character kind of make it to the big screen, and I know sometimes when you look at a lot of black superhero movies, not a lot of great legacy there. You got Meteor Man or Blank Man, Catwoman. It's not a very good legacy, but Blade, I think, has, to me, I think, stood the test of time. Even a movie coming out in 1998, which is, some of the effects obviously look kind of rough. Some of the things are kind of cheesy. Some of the stuff is kind of dated. It is very much 90s to early 2000s cool because these sequels lead up into the early 2000s. The last film, Blade Trinity, was 2004, which was that one came out. And what I mean by that is you got to have, there's a lot of like rave scenes in this. Like that was like the big thing back in the day. Like everybody, they thought all young kids were going to raves.
Yeah, we're going. Yeah, you got the raves, you got the all leather outfits, you got the sunglasses indoors, which, this movie did it first, not The Matrix. This was a year before that.
Yes.
You got the techno soundtrack, which I'll be honest, even watching the movie today, still kind of a banger.
Yeah.
That opening one I think is still good.
Oh yeah, and Bradley, glad you mentioned that.
The opening, it's one of the best openings, I think, to not just a superhero movie, but just to a straight action film, period.
Oh yeah, and I'm playing it right now, so you see, like, this guy who, I forgot this actor's name. I've seen him in a bunch.
This poor schmuck who got honey potted into coming to this vampire rave.
He thinks he's gonna have a good time. He's like, yeah, this chick is a little weird, but
he thinks he's,
she's hot though. So what I mean? Why not?
Yeah. He got lured into a party by Tracy Lords, who, she's grabbing on him in the car. He's like, all right, this is about to be a great night, and then you just get jumped in a club with blood sprinklers.
Yeah. The blood sprinklers start coming on, like he starts to feel it on his face, then it starts pouring down. And Tracy Lords, who has she's named in the movie, like it's I believe like in the opening credits, prominent billing, and she dies in the opening of this movie. But just the way this movie opens is probably one of the best character introductions ever, because you see that he's covered in blood, these vampires all around him, and then he's just absolutely scared for his life, and then he's stumbling, and then all of a sudden, boom. You see Blade
crawling away, and then just clean black boots. This dude's armed to the teeth. He's got a sword on his back, and every single one of those vampires is scared shitless of him. Yeah. They're like, oh, fuck.
And I like how they made sure, like you see, like in that scene, the blood did not touch the black boots. They made sure not to, you know what I mean. That blood stopped right at those black boots. You know what I mean? They're like, nah, you ain't fucking up the fit. You ain't fucking up the nice fit, man. Either the clean boots. You know what I mean?
Hey, I've been watching a lot of Boondocks, and they say in that show that, oh, a pair of sneakers, it's basically $150 landmine.
I mean, it is nice, and you see him. Yeah, like you said, Blade is coming in here, all just armed to the teeth, and it is a great action sequence. A lot of these action sequences are very good, even if the CGI is a little wonky. And some of the things with the vampires die, and they kind of like evaporate into like skeletons and stuff like that. Yeah, some of that doesn't really look the best there, but it's still very, very good and a lot of fun.
The writhing,
and the fun, the writhing of it sells it so well, and it's just hilarious how all of these guys stepping up to Blade think they're gonna be the one. It's like playing Arkham City and getting all those goons like, yeah, I hope Batman comes in here. It's like, motherfucker.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. Take your chance. You got a good chance as anyone else against Blade, I guess.
Yeah, Tracy Lords gets like very prominent billing, and she gets like gut checked and headshotted like not even 10 minutes in the movie.
Yeah,
I don't think they realize it's Blade at first. I think they've all
they're all scared. It's like, oh fuck, it's him. It's the Daywalker.
Surprisingly enough, this actually does a better job of staying true to Richard Matheson's I Am Legend than the adaptation has. The epiphany Robert Neville has towards the end of that book is, I'm what goes bump in the night for these vampires. I'm the thing creeping in the shadows. I Am Legend. That's how it kind of ends. Spoiler for that 40-year-old book. And he shows up and just grins at him, and security comes in while so many vampires, smarter vampires at least, are like, nope, party's over. I'm leaving. I'm out to die. I'm like 100 years old. I'm going to see my 101st. Goodbye. I thought, that's so clever.
I'm staying alive to the fucking future cars. I am not trying to die today.
Such a great character introduction. Before he even fights, we know that he's skilled in ways that these monsters are afraid of. So it's very well done.
These monsters, these vampires that we were just shown to have been horrifying to see. Just see this guy that, as far as we know as an audience, he's one of the first characters we're introduced to, and we are scared right along with him. And then this goddamn leather trench coated monolith shows up, and everything that was scaring the shit out of you is now shitting their pants.
Yeah. And another thing about this movie that makes it really great is it's not an origin movie. When it's so many superhero movies, the first movie's got to be like the origin of setting up the character and how he gets their powers and training to become the hero. Here, it just starts off right off the bat. You see him, he's already established. He's already at the top of his game. He's already doing what he does. And I think that's also a really great thing about that. That maybe something that superhero movies should do more of instead of, doing all this time to spend setting up the character. They do give the backstory of Blade, and the whole premise of this movie is you have the vampire hunter Blade, who other vampires call the Daywalker. He's the Daywalker. You know what I mean? They got their own kind of boogeyman name for him.
It's like and we see at least his origin, as we've come to know later in the film, where it's this woman that's being wheeled into hospital. She's pregnant. She's bleeding profusely out of the neck. We hear the cries of a baby, but then we hear a flat line. And that does so much to establish what we come to know more of Blade the character. And I think this is a very flawed film, but a lot of that comes from Bushy Wright, who plays Dr. Karen Jensen, who is our audience avatar. And she is the one who is more or less filled in on Blade's backstory. Yeah. And she's kind of she is the person that allows Blade and Wesley Snipes to introduce a little bit of vulnerability that we didn't really see a lot in a lot of these kinds of action films.
Yeah. And it's very nice when you have that character there to, you said she's kind of the audience avatar character to explain more of Blade and his history. And then you have Chris Christopherson, who plays Whistler, who's his partner, there that kind of helps him, father figure partner in fighting the war on vampires. This is directed by Stephen Norrington, who previously he also after this he went on to do League of Extremely Leave. I always want to say League of Extremely Ordinary Gentlemen. I always want to say that every time.
Me too. Me too. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah, which he went on to direct that movie, which was a mess, critical and financial failure on all levels there. And then I don't think he's ever directed a movie since the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen broke this man.
Yeah, I guess that was his. What was that movie? With Marlon Brando.
Fucking Island of Dr. Moreau.
Oh,
Yeah, the island. I guess that was his Island of Dr. Moreau there.
It's like, all right, I'm done. I'm done. I can't do this no more.
Yeah. And Chris Christopherson is really great in this movie. He's awesome in this movie. And you can see why he was brought back for the sequel, even though that his character is supposed to die in this first one. So you get why, they kind of brought him back there.
Yeah, his character dies, and it's the emotional climax of the movie. Very much so, because you have Blade who's struggling to hold it together for his mentor, but you can tell it's something behind the eyes of Wesley Snipes in that scene. You can tell he's breaking down internally, and his rampage in the next scene that he goes on, it's palpable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And in that scene, we see that Blade, to this point, just kind of seems like a ruthless killer, for lack of a better term, but that he won't even shoot his mentor when he knows what his mentor is going to become. We actually see a ton of humanity in that. Blade isn't just a mindless killer that enjoys hunting vampires, and he does enjoy it a lot. He's very happy when he's killing vampires.
Hey, you gotta love what you do. Hey, you gotta love what you do.
Exactly. And that's where we discover that, because his mentor's like, you got to kill me. Just do it, Blade. Blade just leaves the gun and walks away, and I thought that was very well done.
Yeah. The main antagonist movie, you have Stephen Dorff, who plays Deacon Frost, who is funny. Stephen Dorff, he's most known probably for doing Blade. I don't know why people ask his opinion on superhero movies. I guess because he was in one, but he always says like they're fucking pointless and they're stupid and who wants to see the things. He's kind of one of those people that talks about it. I say he can't. He can have his opinion on it. It's just kind of, the irony is just kind of funny there that he's most known for doing a superhero movie, and he talks a lot of shit about him. That's just the irony. It's kind of funny there.
Yeah, it's like which I'll say it right now, his best role I've ever seen him in, and the one that he is the most known for, is in a very genre that he apparently despises in every single interview he gives.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
His character, Deacon Frost, is full on 100%. My dad owns a dealership type of behavior,
Exactly. He's kind of like the prototypical son of the mob boss in the way he plays it, in a lot of his ambition. And he's basically, I'm trying to think of how to describe him in like today's terms. He's basically if Logan Paul became a vampire.
Yeah. That is
in the way he plays it, but Stephen Dorff has this kind of nonchalantness and this disdain for the ruling class of vampires that kind of makes this performance kind of better than I remember it being, watching this on VHS when I was a kid.
Yeah. I think with Stephen Dorff, so his whole kind of, with Deacon Frost, his whole kind of goal in this is to become a vampire god, to become the ruler of all vampires. And I think he sees, he has a little bit of, I think, insecurity there because he's amongst the counts of all these pureblood vampires. And there's a little bit of a, kind of a barrier there between pureblood vampires and then vampires who were just turned. And so he kind of feels, I think, a little bit of insecurity there. And he, wants to be kind of top dog amongst these kind of vampires, and doesn't see the need to very much, have a truce or alliance with humans, because a lot of these, vampires, as Blade also talks about. And another good thing about this movie, they do set up good world building as well, because Blade also talks about how vampires are amongst this in this society. They're the, kind of ones pulling the strings behind a lot of things, and they're in politics and all this other various different institutions in order for them to exist in society.
Every single one of the settings we see, like the ruling class of vampire, it's all sleek, it's all very modern. It's like tech that probably doesn't exist yet. There's this air of regalness with a lot of the ruling vampires that we see very briefly in this film, and even more so in the second one. And Deacon Frost, he's like basically just throwing raves in the back of slaughterhouses. He's got like owning nightclubs with fucking pools and bitches along the sides of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like the head vampire, or the head vampires, you could say, a lot like Brian Cox's character in Succession, and Stephen Dorff is the Roman. You know, he's like, I want to be a vampire god and have people bow to me. And the elite vampire's like, dude, that's
Fuck
going to get
off.
us disinvited
Fuck
to
off.
George Clooney's Christmas party. Why would we draw that attention to ourselves? You're out of your mind. Stop being a cartoon child who wants to rule things and get with the actual program. I think both of them have their flaws and their wit about them. Like a vampire god sounds pretty cool, but that, you know, they've been alive for thousands of years. They know the song and dance.
Yeah, and one of the main ones that we spend time with is Dragon Eddie, who's played by Udo Kier, and he plays it with this I've kind of seen everything feel to it. It's like there've been like 100 of you before this, and you're nothing more than another ant to me, which kind of makes that character's death scene that much more tragic, and does a little bit more to set up Frost as an actual villain and a counterpart to Blade.
Yeah. And that bring up that scene of the death scene of the main kind of vampire kind of ruler there, or the lead of the council there, as you kind of are presented to see. Some of the kind of logic as far as the way vampires are seems a little wonky. Like, I mean, there's a scene where Frost meets Blade, and then he's wearing just sunscreen.
And
you know,
in broad daylight. Which, if that can work, why are you fucking around with all this hiding in the shadows? It's like we find out the vampire's own copper tone.
yeah, I just, and then when you really think about it, it's like, wouldn't his eyeballs catch on fire? I mean, he can't put sunscreen on his eyeballs or anything like that.
It's like, what happens? Yeah, it's like, what happens the second you open your mouth to talk?
Yeah, I mean, so
That's kind of my thing.
It
with
also
it.
takes away all the superstition and magic of why they're banished from the sun. You know, the original myth is they creep, they crawl, they are banished from the glory of God, for lack of a better term, which would be the sun. And just putting on sunscreen and be like, that solves that. Not a fan.
yeah.
Yeah, putting on sunscreen, wearing like
just seems
motorcycle
silly,
outfits,
right?
throwing on a motorcycle helmet with a shaded visor somehow protects them from the sun.
Right.
Uh,
And the
Which I,
bloodlust
which,
could be
which I
quelled
kind,
too.
which I kind of get why they made a lot of those decisions, because the comic it's based on, which I think Blade originally appeared in the 70s in the comic Tomb of Dracula, which was basically Marvel publishing like straight up the Dracula story from Bram Stoker. And here they wanted to kind of ground, which by Dave Gore, who would write all three films, and he wanted to ground it and give a more like scientific reason for why vampires exist, which is delved into and kind of sets this apart from a lot of vampire fiction. And I think a lot of what we come to know as vampires today is owed a lot to Blade.
I agree.
And then also that scene where he meets Deacon Frost in the park there. Also, the first time I think we've seen Bullet Time. That was even before The Matrix, because Matrix in 1999, and then Blade was in 1988. So that was kind of first exposure to that.
Shit,
really.
you might be. Shit, you're kind of right. Yeah, the little slow-mo scene where we see the bullets fly and Frost dodges it and then yeets a child into a goddamn taco stand.
And amongst
Sorry. Yeets a child in the initial throw, and then the taco stand shows up, and it's a grown-ass man.
I mean that's kind of weird things you notice too. The body doubles there of that scene were just I mean that was comical there. And Wesley Snipes as the character of Blade, I mean, really just works. I mean, amongst kind of perfect comic book castings, like people always talk about J. Jonah Jameson, played by J.K. Simmons, or maybe Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. Here Wesley Snipes, really I think does such a fantastic job as Blade. That Mahershala Ali, who's going to be Blade in the next upcoming MCU project, there, Blade is going to have a hard act to follow there.
You've got some big ass boots and sunglasses to fill Mahershala Ali. And it's not just the fact that, it's fantastic casting of, not only Wesley Snipes being this insanely talented martial artist, this great stuntman, a lot of the fights and action set pieces, Wesley Snipes is doing that himself. And so much of it is giving this vulnerability and this humanness to a character that, played by any other actor, would have just been kind of this unfeeling killing machine, which I think was a folly of a lot of action films, especially towards the end of the 90s, where we were going to the tail end of the careers of guys like Stallone in their prime, like Schwarzenegger, like Van Damme.
Yeah. And just the way he kind of plays it, because he does play it as a guy who's very, serious, and, he's very dark. There's a man of few words. But then all of a sudden, he'll just kind of burst out and have these kind of moments. And, like, there's the hospital scene that where he gets...
the greatest character break in history, where it's like, we've known him to be this, I came back to finish you off. He just punches a guy. It's like... What the fuck are you out of your damn mind?
I mean, it's like just stuff like that. It's just wild to me how you kind of have those moments. And there's a scene I remember where he's in the car with Wright's character, and then he smiles at her for real quick when he's turning on the car, and then he just goes back to serious face like that. Just this moments like that are just really great. Bradley, what were some of your thoughts on Wesley Snipes' is kind of Blade there?
My understanding that a lot of Wesley Snipes is in Blade. Blade was one of my favorite movies as a teenager. Probably one of the first R-rated movies I've seen. I think I was 15 years old, other than RoboCop. And it's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Chad or you two, that he would talk to the writers and directors, and they would say, "Oh, we got to put that dialogue in," just based on how Wesley Snipes would talk to them. Allegedly, they had this ending where Deacon Frost was a blood tornado. And he cured the blood tornado. Is that true?
Yeah, that was the original ending of the movie. And the original cut of this was like 2.5 hours long. And test audiences hated it. And
that is way too
And then
long,
that original ending was scrapped, and it was reshot. And what ended up in the final product is now the ending of the film. I mean, the original ending had Morbius cameo, which is kind of insane that 25 years ago we almost morbed.
It said morbid time back in the 90s. Well,
I guess
morbed
25 years ago.
Someone overheard Wesley Snipes, and again, this might be an urban legend, but say something like, "Man, some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill." Goyer was like, "That has to be in the movie." It's a brilliant line.
David S. Goyer is like, Goyer and Stephen Norrington are like, "Fuck, we got to throw that in there." Which that is basically Deacon Frost's entire arc throughout this film, where
it is.
He's a guy who is infected. He's not a pure-blooded vampire. He's kind of this punk teenager with a superiority complex, and it's like, some motherfucker's always trying to ice skate uphill before he just like throws up a dart and spin kicks it
into the dude's head.
It's amazing.
I also really appreciate about Blade is this opened up so many of Wesley Snipes' films for me. Wow, as a 15-year-old comic book nerd, that was amazing. And then suddenly I'm watching White Men Can't Jump and New Jack City. And what was one of our favorites? It's a bad movie in retrospect, but it was about like skydivers that would rob banks or something. Not Point Break. I think it was called Terminal Velocity. But,
Oh shit.
me and my cousin would just binge these Wesley Snipe movies. I even unironically enjoyed Murder at 1600 and The Art of War. You know, it was just
Mm.
my guy to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, Van
Yeah.
Damme and Steven Seagal were. This is what I was explaining to my son Calvin today because he was like, "What are you watching?" I'm like, "Oh, it's Blade," and you know, starts watching and he's like, "This is pretty cool." And Wesker breaks through
Mhm.
the, you know, the side of a building and goes, "Catch you fuckers at a bad time."
Yes,
Looks over
it's
at me.
so good.
My second son, he's old enough to watch this. He looks over at me and goes, "I'm sorry, isn't Blade a Marvel character?" And I'm like, "He is. This is
Yeah,
how they
baby.
did it back then."
Yeah, and it's so funny because I think outside of like a blurb in the opening credits, very little Marvel is in either this or the second movie.
Yeah.
Besides just like in association with Marvel Entertainment, they really don't have a footprint on this. And which is kind of insane because when you really think about it, and I have this take where I think Blade is the single most important film as far as like the early 90s and the late 90s and the early 2000s because without this movie, without the showing that a Marvel property can be one a very dark superhero film and b the first big success for Marvel films because besides this the couple unreleased the unreleased Fantastic Four movie, the unreleased Captain America one, the last Marvel film that went to theaters was Howard the Duck
Mm.
before Blade. And without this, we don't get films like X-Men, we don't get Spider-Man, we don't get the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So a lot of kind of the landscape of cinema today, I think is owed to Blade, and I think it's the most important film to come out in the last like 30 some years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let me play that classic line there. That Goyer just felt like he had to kind of put in the film there. That was
Allegedly, if
Some
that story is
motherfuckers
true,
are
which I'm
always
really
trying to
hoping
make
it is.
skate uphill.
and that whole action scene at the end is really great. I mean, you have a scene where he rips a dude's throat out and throws it at another dude. I mean, that's can't get better than that.
He rips a dude's throat out and throws it at another dude. He has a guy down on the floor and is just repeatedly soccer kicking him in his balls before he just lifts him up 8 feet in the air. He has a spin kick off with another goon in the middle of this massive fight scene. And
Uh,
none of it is played with even an ounce of winking at the camera. It's played so straight and it's so much fun.
mm, yeah, absolutely. And kind of adding to that, net feeling, Daniel Logue, who we've got to mention, who plays one of the henchmen vampires of Stephen Dorff's character, Deacon Frost, is also really great
Yeah,
here.
he's very much the comic relief of the film, but it's not in that like paused and wait for the studio audience laugh kind of sense of humor that I feel has infected a lot of Marvel films and superhero films in general in the last like couple years. It's played more like a very dark Looney Tunes because the running gag is he keeps getting bits of him cut off throughout. He gets set on fire through it. He gets pinned to a wall with the greatest action movie gif of Blade holding a shotgun. It's just like,
Mm.
I do got to correct myself. Terminal Velocity was a Charlie Sheen action movie. The
oh,
one
that's
I'm
less
thinking
cool.
of where they jump out of planes and we can't fall too fast. We're doing a heist. Gary Busey in it, also in Point Break, and that was the Wesley Snipes movie
Ah,
about
okay.
parachuters. So yeah, professional
Ah, okay.
skydivers team up with tough cops and try to capture a renegade computer hacker. So it's a terrible movie, but me and my cousin would watch it all the time because Wesley Snipes is just one of our favorite action heroes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about action heroes and you bring up Wesley Snipes, I think a lot of that is because just off of his resume, because besides Blade, you get stuff like Passenger 57, Demolition Man,
Mhm.
and just recently with Dolomite is My Name and Coming to America, which I think his character is the best part about that.
Yeah.
I think out of all the late '90s action stars, he's probably the best actor out of all of them, besides Stallone
Absolutely.
when he wants to try.
Yeah.
Harsh for Stallone, but I do agree, though.
Harsh
Like
but accurate.
Jean-Claude Van Damme and Schwarzenegger, when they kind of got over their, we'll say, punch kick, or they just kind of faded because of how awful they were at acting. Which I'm not trying to come down on anyone, but you imagine Jean-Claude Van Damme trying to give a nuanced performance? I did like JCVD
Yeah,
actually.
the
That's
Yeah,
monologue in
JCVD
JCVD is
is
pretty good.
the
fantastic.
monologue in
Yeah,
JCVD is really good.
JCVD is fantastic, and
Yeah.
and and Blade is one of the best characters, and I think one of Snipes's iconic performances, and one of the iconic black superheroes. Because
Mm,
as much credit as Black Panther gets for being like one of the big, what being the first black Marvel character, Blade did it first.
yeah. Well, I mean, there were black other, but this one was like a bigger one. This one, had a lot more money behind it. It was on a budget of 45 million, made 131 million in the box office. So that was considered like a really
Nice.
big hit back in 1998 to make that much money, at the time there. And to go back a little bit to some of the other characters here, like Wright's character, who plays Dr. Karen Jensen, her big kind of pivotal role here. And I like kind of what they do here, that she's not just a love interest in the movie. Maybe in a lesser movie, she would just been a love interest. But I feel like a lot of the female characters of Blade, even in the second one, which we're going to get into very shortly, have like more of just a purpose behind, she's just an attractive woman. Here, she comes up.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
and even if I think Wright's performance is one of the weaker ones in the film, her character does serve more of a purpose than just being a love interest, because she has her own agency, she has her own arc in the plot that drives her forward, because she's a woman that is collateral damage in one of Blade's outings, and because he sees so much of his mother in her, he rescues her, and she is like one of the people trying to find a cure for herself and to help Blade in his mission. In fact, without her, the actual ending we got doesn't happen.
Yeah, true.
Because she's one who's trying to discover a cure of vampirism, and because she ends up getting bit herself, so that leads her to kind of trying to find a cure, and then in the discovery to try to find a cure, she creates this weapon against vampires that Blade uses, which is really good. Bradley, what do you think about her character there, Bradley?
I do really like that she's not just. She is a very beautiful woman, of course, but so many victims and damsels kind of just stay that way. Like she has this empathy for Blade, but it never translates into, but I can save you and I can cuddle you and you don't have to go on with your
It's
dark
like,
mission.
oh, it's like so many of these love interests in these action movies. Like, oh my God, you're so broken. Now give me that dick, boy. I mean,
Yeah. Exactly. No, she, like you pointed out very well, she has her own goals of not wanting to be a vampire, and her and Blade's goals actually kind of correlate with saving the day. And I think she's a brilliant character in terms of, is it an auxiliary character for us to learn about the lore of this world that Blade lives in, without it sounding like lazy exposition,
Yeah, I
Riding
do.
around with him in his badass car, and as he explains like the inner workings of the night, it's great.
yeah, being the other bad cop in that scene with Pearl where she's holding the lamp.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny when you talk about when he's explaining to her the world of the vampires. It's like, this ain't like the stuff in the movies, that garlic and crosses, that don't do shit. But let's do shit from the movies, like steaks and sunlight, that all works. You know what I mean? It's like, well, maybe you should see some movies, maybe not all movies. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So I think that was kind of funny that they did that. But and yeah, I mean, just great world building stuff with this. Like you mentioned, the interrogation scene when you see this obese, morbidly obese vampire there. You know what I mean. I remember I was watching the Red Letter Media review they did of this film, and then it was Jay who mentioned like that's pretty much every single internet troll that you ever see. Like somebody who goes like, it's like people say like, Jennifer Lawrence and Brie Larson. It's like, oh, she's not that hot. She's not that attractive. You know what I mean? And stuff like that.
Just perfect from this. It's just Pearl from this movie and the D&D guy from the the World of Warcraft guy from South Park.
So I thought that was I thought that was kind of a funny joke there. Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of great stuff. You mentioned the I'm gonna play a little bit of the end credit scene here that wasn't in the movie. I wonder. So who do you all? If they did a sequel and they included Morbius, who do you think would have played Morbius because Blade 2 came out in '03. So who would have played Morbius, you think?
Yeah, Blade 2. Yeah, Blade 2 was 2002.
Oh.
And shit, I think they probably would have tried to go with Josh Lucas because I think they were trying to make him like a big action star in the early 2000s.
Josh Lucas. What about you?
Be lazy and just say Keanu. Keanu should be like, "Oh, you're a vampire hunter. I'm a vampire.
Vampire
we should
hunter.
work together."
I'm a vampire. Maybe we could do some good. Whoa.
For some reason,
Maybe.
you mentioned Josh Lucas. Josh Hartnett. Was he kind of like a thing back in like?
Oh shit! Yeah, that's right.
He's in a pretty good vampire movie too, actually. 30 Days of Night. I don't remember when that came out, but he was decent in it.
Yeah, that was like I think that was 2006, and I think that was
movie,
like that's one of my favorite vampire movies. Period. And he probably would have been a great choice for Morbius. Which, play him as a supporting character. Don't have him lead a movie and lead a very half-assed thought-out movie, like we'll probably talk about later when we get to Blade Trinity.
Yeah. Let me play a little bit of this Morbius here.
It's over.
Like, really
You keep your cue.
It's like,
I've never felt better.
Frost was bad. Well,
Besides, as long as there's a war going on, I still have a job to do.
Oh, yeah? Then you're back on the clock.
Marvel. I don't really lump those in when I use the term.
It's over.
Oh shit.
Try something out.
Yeah, so I played the Morbius clip. So it's just kind of a guy standing on a roof, kind of looking. Yeah, I mean, it's just looking like a ninja there.
It's just a guy standing. Yeah, it's just a guy standing on a roof who the stand-in was Stephen Norrington, the director of this.
Yeah.
And it's like he's covered up in scars because they didn't have him cast yet. This was very much a product of the film's original ending.
Yeah. So
I really like the endings when Blade is just doing his thing, and that's the adventure is over. Deacon Frost is defeated, but the war continues. And this vampire thinks he's about to have a snack, and then Blade shows up. And like I said earlier, it's the legend, the monster that's coming for the vampire. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
He speaks Russian. That's so cool.
Yeah. Comes back. Yeah, you see the kind of.
It's like and he taught me the only word in Russian I actually know besides suka. It's dos dovadish, which is a comrade.
And that vampire's like, "Oh, I'm about to die."
You can tell, even if that dude was trying to act tough in front of like this chick he's about to eat, he's like, fuck.
Yeah. Well, it's such a good turn for the vampires because they have this victim, and this victim is like, "This is it. I'm gonna die tonight." And then those vampires, when they see Blade, are like, "Oh, this is it. I'm gonna die tonight." It's so cool.
Yeah, and that ending of Blade, where he's in Russia, follows up into the second movie, where that whole is kind of just a mission for him to find Whistler, who the vampire. So at the end, at the end of the first one, he didn't end up dying. He ended up turning into a vampire, and then vampires kept him held up.
It's like this dude that Blade is torturing with a motorcycle wheel, which looks horrifying and is very, very intense. And it's like they try to like save face. It's like when he shot himself, then he turned. It's like pretty sure that's not how that works, but okay.
Yeah.
But okay, we get more.
Character.
We get more of Chris Christopherson, and which the dude wrote a top 5 Johnny Cash song, so I'll always appreciate seeing more of him.
Yeah. So it's just
little Robert Pattinson was watching that motorcycle torture scene with like eyes aglow, like I'm gonna do that one day on camera.
And this film, which is again written by David S. Goyer, is directed by Guillermo del Toro, which, if I'm not mistaken, this is one of his first English language films, if memory serves.
Yeah, I believe it is. Yeah, one of his first kind of English language films. Guillermo del Toro, really blowing up right now. He got just the best director Oscar for The Shape of Water. He did a really great Pinocchio movie, one of the 3 Pinocchio movies that came out last year. I don't know why there were 3, but there were 3 last year, and he did the best one by far, which is nominated now for Best Animated Feature, which is on Netflix. He also has another Netflix called Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. That's also on Netflix. He also did the movie I'm blanking on it, that I really love, Nightmare Alley with Bradley Cooper. Love that movie. Really amazing movie. Got overlooked.
Same. I loved it as well.
Overlooked by the
Very much
Academy.
so. And of course, another film in this kind of gothic superhero film genre with the original Hellboy.
Yeah, because anytime Guillermo del Toro does something, Ron Perlman has to be there. Ron Perlman, that's his boy, that's his guy. He did the Hellboy movies with him. It was in Blade with him. He loves Ron Perlman. That's his guy. There. So, and Blade 2 is probably Guillermo del Toro's worst film, but it's still a great movie. I mean, that just goes to show you how good his catalog is.
I mean, I'm not crazy about Crimson Peak.
Oh yeah, Crimson Peak is
kind of like on the lower. This is like B tier Del Toro.
Yeah.
But this is still a fantastic fucking movie. And I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but I have a lot of connection with Blade 2 because this was the first rated R movie I saw in theaters. It was like the last day of school. I think one of the last days I was in elementary school, and this movie was coming out, and I begged my parents to take me to the theater and go see it. So it was like a whole day. Last day of school came, went out to eat. We went to the movies, and little, I think like 10-year-old me was scared shitless at the opening of this movie.
Yeah. Because it is, Guillermo del Toro does the creature features. I love the monsters. He loves the monsters.
Yeah.
Loves the things that go bump in the night.
Yeah, all 3 films kind of dance around with the horror because, you introduce vampires into your movie. There's going to be a little tinges of horror. And this film does it, I think, better than any of the other Blade films, because there are parts of this where you see the Reapers, which are this Nosferatu inspired mutations of vampires where they're immune to silver and garlic. They have this horrifying like plague look to them, and they're terrifying whenever they're on screen.
Yeah. Because the whole premise of this one, you have it where the vampires are now going to Blade and teaming up with him to fight these new, like Nick said, mutation of the vampires, these reavers, creatures who aren't just normal vampires and more, powerful. Their thirst is unquenchable. You know what I mean? They're just constantly feeding and feeding and feeding, and they just won't stop. And it takes a lot more to kill him, than just the regular old stuff that you would just kill a vampire with. And this was kind of also big because it was my first exposure to Donnie Yen, who's in this movie. Criminally underrated, though, that he's criminally underused, I should say, that he's in this movie, how he's in this movie. Because he really is part of like this big team, the special ops vampire team that was specifically designed to take on Blade.
The Blood Pack, who they say that, yes, we've been training a small tactical unit. We want you to lead them. And it's like 2 years. It's like, yeah, we've been training to hunt you, Blade, which just as much as I think David S. Goyer as a writer is very much hit or miss, like for every Blade, for every Blade 2, and even just something as recent as this audio series on Spotify, Batman Unburied, which, Bradley, I got to thank you for turning me on to, which he was the writer on that.
You're very welcome. It's incredible, yes.
We get a lot more misses from David S. Goyer, which just credits to him. Just the idea of having Blade lead a team that has been training to hunt him is such a cool concept in and of itself.
Yeah. And here's the scene where he meets the Blood Pack.
Blood Pack.
He's just punking out Ron Perlman.
Crazy
Priest.
that Norman Reedus has more dialogue in this one movie than all of the Walking Dead.
Yeah.
It's
It's
good of the Blood Pack.
it's
Character's name.
I mean, they're basically the Blood Pack. They're like video game characters, basically. They're like people you pick in like a video game, fighting game type situation. Like you got the one big dude who's got the hammer and like his girlfriend, and then you got the Donnie Yen who's got the sword, and you got the one guy Chupa who's got the big guns and stuff. Like they're like video game characters, basically.
Chupa is played by Matt Schultz, who played Vince in the Fast and the Furious. And this might as well just be Vince from Fast and Furious.
Yeah, basically.
Del Toro perfected his team-based type of films with Hellboy, I would say. This was more of a prototype
100%.
of how that would go, the origin of his teamwork movies, if you will.
Yeah. And Nick, you mentioned the scene with Ron Perlman that's also in here, where he asked him a very important question here that he was going to regret asking later.
Yes, the most important.
Yeah.
Can you blush?
Hey,
like,
me and the gang
bruh.
wondering.
And then it just spends.
Oh no, I'm playing a clip here real quick. I'm playing a clip.
Oh, yes.
Can you blush?
Here we go, Poppy.
Oh, I get it. I see now.
Yeah. Which if people don't know, so that kind of has like a little bit of like racist undertones there.
A little bit, and even you can tell in the clip that Blade was already thinking, okay, I'm already gonna plant this bomb on him, but you just made it so much worse for yourself.
Yeah. And it's kind of a great interplay. Like I said, him leading a team of vampires that are meant to kill him is a very cool concept. Bradley, what were some of your thoughts on Blade 2 there?
I actually love the Blood Pact. They're campy in that way that reminded me of being a kid watching superhero team-ups, whether it was animated features or... I still, to this day, adore Batman 66. So many times someone has like a niche or a gadget or just a personality based on their weapon, I'm like, I'm having a fun time. This is cool. So when they kind of get to the double, what is there like a triple cross in this movie? And everyone just starts turning on everyone else. It kind of emotionally bums me out. Like, but I like the Blood Pact.
It's like in the very first scene where Blade and the Blood Pack are out, one of them gets instantly bitten and turned by a Reaper, and it's a very, very kind of emotionally charged scene where this guy that they've been very close to for 2 years is turning into one of these monsters, and they're just trying so desperately to put him out of his misery.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, really love the design here. I've loved so many of Guillermo del Toro's creatures, I'm just going to call them. And something about del Toro that you see through this, even an action film about a vampire hunter, is he always has sympathy for the devil. And that's a poetic term, but Nomak isn't just a brain-dead monster. He actually has his own ambitions, his goal. He's lonely. When it comes down to it, he's just this lonely, vile, kind of cool guy. I'd hang out with him.
And Nomak is played by Luke Goss, who would go on to work with Del Toro in Hellboy 2: The Golden Army as Prince Nuada. And he is a much more interesting character than I remember from watching this movie in theaters. And the summer I had Stars, where they played this every single day for an entire 2 months, and I watched it every single time. And he's so much more interesting because he is very much just a child that was experimented on by his father and has this just deep hatred and this grudge against his father, who's played by Thomas Kretschmann under heavy makeup.
Yeah.
Heavy.
Great stuff there.
Skinos is his name,
makeup wise, when they do, I mean, again, this movie being, kind of 2002, still kind of bad effects. Cause I remember there was a scene, especially like when they're fighting, like in the, kind of towards the beginning of the movie, when they first, kind of invade, Blade's compound, the squad that Blade is going to end up leading. There's a particular scene where he's fighting, the female vampire, and it just looks like a straight video game. It looks like straight PS2.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does.
Yeah. There is a little bit of that kind of rubbery 2000 CG that does look a little bit funky, but in context, I think it does kind of work because these are two superhumans. They kind of do move that unnaturally fast that even as kind of rubbery as it looks, it still works for me in the scene.
I
Yeah.
think it worked a lot better on. I went and binged all of these just recently, preparing. It worked a lot better than I remembered. Tell me, was Wesley Snipes was his body finally like, we can't do this anymore? You can't kick that high anymore. You can't spin that fast anymore.
No,
Give us
I
a
think
break. Is that why the decision?
I think it
the
I think it
CGI
I,
models?
I think it was more and I don't know how much of this is true because I remember back when the Nerdist podcast was a thing and Norman Reedus was a guest on there and he told the story about how they finished shooting one of the big action scenes with Del Toro and it was this opening. So after that to celebrate, they all went out in the middle of I think Amsterdam where they shot this. Everyone was getting fucked up, just popping ecstasy and just doing coke. And then like mid party at like 2 a.m, they say, "Hey, we're gonna need to reshoot that. We need you all here in like the next couple hours." It's like, fuck.
Yeah.
And everyone was still hungover and still coming down from all of the shit they did the night before.
Yeah.
Now this is all alleged. I don't know how much of that is true, but I think a lot of that contributes to the way this film looks.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Wesley Snipes, he
when-
was 38 in Blade 2. He was 38.
Okay.
Oof.
That's getting there. That's 2 years. 2 years away from your knees going. Never coming back.
Yeah. And the female vampire here was Nessa, who's played by Lenora Valeria, who is in this. I think
and there's and as much as I love the first two Blade movies, they are very flawed films. And I think the biggest flaw of this movie is the character Nissa, who is not just because Lena Valera. I think she's a perfectly fine actress. I just think a lot of the emotional beats that her character is given, and in deleted scenes, there was more of a romance between her and Blade. Okay. I don't think that carries into her performance here.
Not really, no.
Yeah.
And she also has her own goals and her own ambitions and her own family drama that we find out later towards the end. So
yeah. Much
I
like
think it's funny how in Blade 1 and even in this one, Blade 2, a vampire's death is the most horrific, violent, scary thing. Hers is kind of romantic, spoilers for Blade 2, I guess. It's like this soft little romantic
it's this
floating away. It's fine, but it's just a little weird.
Yeah, which I think more time was needed to develop a relationship between Blade and Nissa, because even in like the scene where they're in the sewer and hunting down all the Reapers, everyone's scared. Blade, even before that, was like, "Hey, I don't expect none of y'all to make it back tomorrow." He even goes back for Nissa. It's like, "Oh shit, the bomb pact is getting prepared. I need to go back for her."
Yeah. Yeah, so I think another, you barely mentioned, like much like kind of with the first movie, she's a character who has her own goals, had her own motivations, got her own stuff going on. The family drama stuff because her father is, I guess, King Vampire. I guess he's like one of the oldest vampires ever, and she's kind of got her own like different family dynamics there going on. So I thought that was pretty interesting there. Again, even though the effects are kind of wonky, still good action stuff. I still think that you kind of see here again. Good Donnie Yen stuff. That scene when they go into the club, when they go to the House of Pain, that whole sequence, very good. That whole setup, that was very good stuff.
That whole Hellraiser club sequence, and one of the better and for as kind of like very product of its time as the soundtracks of all three of these movies, I think 2 kind of has the best needle drops, because before that, you get that slow motion walk of the entire blood pack walking to this club to Eye Against Eye, which to this day, that song is a fucking banger.
I agree.
Yeah. And again, it has great, Whistler moments. It's got great Wesley Snipes as Blade moments. Like when he's in the sewer and he drops the bomb and, he yells, you don't know who you're fucking with. Like that's just absolutely, I think really great there. More,
and in a performance that I don't think we talked about with Ron Perlman, where he does kind of have this like I'm better than I actually am, and his biggest moves is just he's such a conniving little bitch. It's hilarious to watch. It's like in that scene, it's like a tense action moment, and Blade is like going towards the bomb pack, and he neglects to mention it's like, oh, by the way, Blade, did I mention the bomb lever's stuck?
and
While he's surrounded, it's hilarious.
And Bradley, you mentioned how there's like a lot of double cross, triple cross type things. So in the movie, you mentioned Norman Reedus' character. So it turns out at the end that he's not on Blade's side because when we're first introduced to him, he's like another whistler to Blade, where he's making all the gadgets. He's the one that's souping up his car and making it all what I mean, fancy and stuff. So it's good to go. His own Batmobile type thing. But he does a cross that he's been working with the vampires the whole time. But then Blade, when he reveals that, he goes like, well, I always knew you were dirty, but it's like, but you allowed this guy to be in your operation and work with you. So it's like, I don't.
Why would you allow him in your car then?
It's like, as much as I love all three, as much as I love Blade 1 and 2, I am never going to call them the best written movies ever. However, that entire like triple cross scene is just this perfectly executed B movie cheese. That is so well done.
That's probably even what Guillermo was going for as well.
Even the aftermath of like Whistler is like, I was just starting to like him.
Oh yeah. Let me.
Well, exactly.
Let me see. Let me cue up that scene right here.
One of Damasceno's familiars. They needed my help to bring you here to control Nomak. The old fuck, he was always just bait. I mean, look at him. He's your only real weakness, man. You may be fast, you may be strong, and all that other bullshit, but in the end, B, you're just too human.
Well, you little shit.
Let me see. Let me go forward a little bit to see where he finally blows him up, because that's kind of a good scene there.
It's so good.
What do you think about that, man?
Two things.
It's like, wow, this is the most rage that Norman Reedus has ever been shown.
Since they turned you.
Right though?
Two. It's not a dud.
Oh, great.
Final line. Oh, great. That's kind of his final line there. It just explodes. And it kind of ends the way the first one kind of ends, because there's a scene where he has to like regain his strength again, like in the first one where he has to, he's ingesting blood, because Blade doesn't drink blood like a normal vampire. He takes like a synthetic type of thing or a concoction that he makes so he doesn't drink human blood, because he has one of the vampire's weaknesses, which is the thirst. He does crave blood, but he doesn't drink. He tries not to drink human blood at all. Here in the second one, he ends up diving into a pool of blood, where he comes out, and he gets supercharged again, and he starts killing all the vampires there, and he ends up of course he does it while he's wearing his.
Those aren't vampires. Those are the hapless security company that they've hired.
Oh yeah, I mean, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, he does. Yeah, and he ends up just kind of killing them. Catches his sunglasses, everything like that.
It's such a great fucking scene. It is, again, going back to that B movie cheese. It's just, I think that's the peak of this franchise. It is that kind of slick style to it. It is that incredibly intricate choreography. It is that cinematography where we see every little twitch in the actors in their fights. It is this incredible needle drop of massive attacks in the name of the game, which again, banger. And even the action queuing up to "Listen, all you motherfuckers."
I do want to say, to add to the scene real quick, a lot of superhero directors, they will use religious iconography and imagery in their films. I think Guillermo del Toro going the way of a full blood baptism before laying waste to God's enemies, quote unquote, is the best best kind of religious reference that I've seen in these superhero movies. I have nothing against the Spider-Man Christ pose or the Superman Christ pose. The Blade 2 one's
I
definitely
do.
my favorite.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's cool.
Bradley, what do you think? Blade 1 or Blade 2? Which you think is better?
I'm way more nostalgic for Blade 1. Like I said before, I ended up liking the Blood Pact, and me and my brother would often. My brother was an artist at the time, and often would a storyteller. He's still a storyteller, but I really liked the Blood Pact. So when things just went shitty for them, it turned out they were assholes. I was bummed. And the ending of Blade 2, especially when the villain himself is like, well, here's my chance to end my misery, and he takes it, that really depressed me. So that alone is why I have to go with Blade 1. Nostalgia, and because I just enjoy the fist pump that he does in Blade 1. I just enjoy the overall fist pump of that movie more. And Guillermo is great. Like, these type of action movies, a teenage kid who just wants an action beat going, why, Guillermo? Why make me feel sad? Like, that's on me. I take that personally. But we need more superhero movies that take swings like that to tell like a human story like that.
Yeah. Nick.
But Blade 1, in short, to answer your question, over Blade 2.
Oh,
This is very hard for me to answer because Blade 1 was, I think it was the first like rated R movie I watched with my dad. I think I was 8 at the time, and then a couple years later, I was just walking out of my parents. I saw a poster for Blade 2, and I remember just going, "Dad, they're making another one!"
That's great.
Yeah, and getting that like huge experience of having it be the last day of school, going to see Blade 2 in the theater to kick off my summer of 2002. It was just this incredible experience, and I had a lot of nostalgia for Blade for both of the first 2 Blade films. And I think I kind of overwrit them as like, yeah, those movies were fun until I could rewatch them a couple of years ago. And then just seeing a lot of the first Blade, where I think it is a very flawed film. I think even though we talked about how great, and Bushy writes, Karen Jensen is as a character, I think her performance is like the one thing that is kind of a hindrance. And I'm not too crazy about the third act of that movie. Just the actual ending and the whole like MacGuffin of let's awaken the blood god plot. I think that's the most comic booky part of that film, and I think it's also the weakest aspect.
Yeah.
And Blade 2, I think it is probably one of my favorite movie sequels ever because I love the first Blade movie, and Blade 2, it's one of my favorite sequels. It's one of my favorite vampire movies. It's taking a lot of the lore that was established in the first film, but introducing more of that horror aspects to it and showing a lot of what Del Toro would bring to cinema in his much later films, even down to as kind of wonky as the CG of both films are, when it gets practical, like with that nasty autopsy scene of one of the Reapers, it is grotesque. It's like a Cronenbergian nightmare, which I think even when I was queuing up Blade 2, I posted in one of our group chats, it's like Blade 2 or Blade does Cronenberg, which it's so much fun. And even down to having a much more interesting arc than I remember for Nomak, where he is this kid lashing out at the people who created him, and that kind of bittersweet ending. It's like Blade 1, but Nomak was kind of a victim of his father.
Yeah.
I mean, still a horrible monster and needs to go, but there's more depth to both of these films than I remember. And this is one of my favorite franchises ever off of these 2 films.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like great stuff there with Blade 2. I'm looking at Guillermo del Toro's filmography. I forgot, like, I don't think this is his weakest film. I said that maybe at the beginning. Yeah, Pacific Rim, I think, is way weaker. I think Pacific Rim is way weaker. I don't like Pacific Rim.
I agree, but I also love Pacific Rim.
So I mean, this does a lot of great things, especially with Guillermo del Toro directing. A lot of the creature stuff, a lot of the effects, and the practical stuff that they do there is really good. The fight scene is a little, again, like a 2000 fight scene. Kind of looks like some WWE, you know, to me, 2K, you know, kind of stuff.
It is very much WWE, but I think even if the actual cinematography and the CG aspects of it do look a little wonky, I think the sound design sells it. I think the sound is like you hear every single crunch of every single impact landed, and I think that sells it more than even the faults of that actual scene. And again, just getting that very bittersweet, because I think this is the only film in the franchise where we actually see Blade in any kind of danger with his final fight scene with Nomad, because Blade, even with the first film where he's kind of outmatched, it's like he plays it with such a cool-headedness that, you know, Blade's gonna make it out all right, okay?
Yeah. Sure. It's interesting that this film, you know, kind of has a little bit of connection with the first one, in that they also kind of bring back more of a family stuff with it. Because in the first one, it was with Deacon Frost, who was with his mother, which they don't really play into that much. Shania Lathan, who's in the first one.
You mean the super Oedipal shit of the first one?
Yeah, which was, they don't really play into that much, that he had a relationship with his mother. That doesn't come up until kind of the end of it. Here in the sequel, they kind of bring up like the whole relation with Nomak and his father and how there's that dynamic. And then you also have Nessa, who's the sister of Nomak, and then that relation with the father. And Bradley mentioned how that, kind of her death is kind of a very kind of more of a romantic, I guess, kind of one, or more of a softer death than you see in the other kind of movies there for the other characters. Also, the movie ends great stinger, great kind of funny kind of thing at the end where he ends up where he goes back to the guy in the first one.
Which even when I was watching it, I was like, oh shit, I kind of forgot about him.
Yeah,
it's like, again, it's such a great final Blade shot. It's like it's Blade being as cool as a motherfucker.
Yeah, and he loves what he does.
Which is what separates this character from a lot, is that he's just the coolest motherfucker that has ever lived, and he loves what he does. And it's like, oh, you didn't think I forgot about you, did you?
So many superheroes, and this is still to this day, have that, only I can save the day. It's a burdensome responsibility, and it breaks my heart that it falls on me, but I will sacrifice my time for this cause. And Blade's all like, time to do my favorite thing in the world and kill some vampires, you know?
Yeah, he's basically that dude from Rick and Morty. It's like, oh boy, here I go killing again.
Crumbopulous Michael, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you even see in the trailer, I mean, he's giving a big smile. He's in the club like, yeah, I get to kill some vampires. It was fucking great. It was fucking awesome. You know what I mean? Seeing all those, just pearly whites. Yeah. And this leads into Blade Trinity, which is the final film of the Wesley Snipes trilogy there. With Blade Trilogy, Trinity, there was a lot of things about this movie, a lot of kind of horror stories that you've heard about it probably. This was directed by David S. Goyer, who wrote the previous two Blade movies. This was his directorial debut.
Yeah, this was David S. Goyer's directorial debut. And I think Patton Oswalt said it best in, I think, one of his interviews about this film. It's like, if you watch Blade Trinity on its own, or you watch it just in context of the other two movies, it's a D-. It's a waste of fucking film, which is my actual rating for Blade Trinity. But if you understand all of the context of all of the horror stories of what went into making Blade Trinity, it's a goddamn A+. It's like Citizen Kane levels of, it's a miracle that this movie got off the ground in any sense of the word.
Yeah, and here's a clip of Patton Oswalt. Here's him talking about it right here.
We were in Vancouver, and Wesley Snipes was going crazy. He would only answer to the name Blade. He would communicate with Post-its that he would give to the director, and each one he would sign Blade.
Yeah. So Patton Oswalt was talking about just the behavior of Wesley Snipes on the set of Blade Trinity, and also the fact that like his trailer just like reeked of weed. Also, like he would walk past it and it would just be this huge smell there. How people also there's a review Cosmonaut Variety out. Marcus, he did a review also of Blade Trinity or the whole Blade trilogy, and he also talked about how people even just laughing at the script. I mean, like Parker Posey is in this movie, that they would just laugh at the dialogue they had to say. Natasha Lyonne, she's also in this, and there's scenes of her just laughing at the dialogue. It's just incredibly ridiculous.
Which I forgot she was in this, and I just started watching Poker Face, and then when I see Natasha Lyonne pop up in this, I just wanted to say, "Oh, honey, no! What are you doing here?"
Probably with Wesley in his trailer, getting very open, by the way, about her journey to overcome and reach sobriety. So, bad joke. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, and it's kind of insane because originally this was going to be a closer follow-up to the first two films. Like one of the original pitches was this is going to be like a post-apocalypse film where the vampires won, and it was essentially going to be Old Man Blade. But the studio was kind of shaky on that, so Goyer had to rewrite the film from the ground up. And it's like like Stephen Norrington was at one point attached to direct this. He turned it down because he hated Goyer's script. Guillermo del Toro was attached to this to come back from the second one, but he turned it down to direct Hellboy, which, good call, bro.
Good call.
Yeah.
What's so surprising to me is this. I hate how great this cast on paper is, other than maybe Triple H. Not a great actor, it turns out. But on paper, Parker Posey's here. Ryan Reynolds.
Parker Posey, who is doesn't have the best resume, but she is always a standout in anything she's in. Like, as much as I dislike Scream 3, she is the highlight of that movie.
Definitely. And you said earlier, Natasha Lyonne is here, who's brilliant, really having a resurgence right now. I'm so glad, Mr. Russian Doll, that people are finally seeing her brilliance. Who told Ryan Reynolds to be this serious? Like, what idiot gave him that idea to be so rough? Like, that is a horrible way.
He's not even fucking gruff in this. It's like every single take he's basically playing Deadpool before fucking Deadpool.
Deadpool is way more charming than Hannibal in this, and I think he'd be a great Hannibal. Is also what makes me so irritated by this script. From the few comics I've read, Blade and Hannibal are great stories.
Yeah, it doesn't even feel like it's scripted. It feels like Goyer, who this was his directorial debut, and a lot of this film I think is owed to an experience on his part.
Yeah,
and a lot of Ryan Reynolds' bits in this feels like he was just told to improvise.
Yeah,
because I think he's really honed his craft. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but like he's all like, "Your dick." Like that's how he says it. But now that he's like at the peak of his powers, he could sell the line better now, is what I'm saying.
Even in that scene, like, I don't know if it's in the script or Parker Posey was just sick of it. Is like, everyone just please stop saying the word dick.
And I mean, in this movie, like I say, you look at it on paper, you got Jessica Biel, you got Ryan Reynolds, you got Parker Posey, you got Dominic Purcell. People will know he was in Prison Break. I think he was like in the first season or a couple seasons of Prison Break by this time this was out.
He was the brother.
He was like the main secondary protagonist of Prison.
Yeah,
and he was also played a Mick Rory or a Heat Wave in both The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Patton Oswalt is in this as well. James Remar is in this. Of course, you have Chris Christopherson, who's returning, and also Wesley Snipes is returning. But Chris Christopherson is Wesley. He dies at this movie. He's the one that just is like, I can't do this anymore. This shit is crap. He got out.
It's like, oh my god, this time. It's like, oh my god. Sucks. Get me out of this movie.
So he was lucky he didn't have to be on there for that long. And Goyer, I mean, the way he talks about his style is he's like, I don't really write dialogue. I just kind of write situations, and I let the actors kind of, you know what I mean, kind of, because they can just kind of do it as they kind of go along. So he doesn't, like he says, he's not very good at writing dialogue, even though I mean he says that. So that's kind of his whole style.
Yeah, dude, we can tell.
And the premise of this one is you have another kind of vampire society kind of group here led by Parker Posey, who's all about bringing back Dracula, who is Dominic Purcell's character there, and trying to resurrect him so that he can lead the vampires again. And then, of course, Blade and his team are trying to stop him, but of course, with addition to the vampires, in this one, I like how they do kind of play into the fact that vampires have their play in society, because you see that they're kind of manipulating things with the police and then the FBI, because they're also hunting Blade along with that. So I kind of like that a little bit, that they're playing into that, because they never really did that in the second or first movie that much, even though they mention it. So I do like that.
Yeah, and a lot of my problems with this movie, I think it comes down to wasted potential, because like we said about the second movie, just the concept of Blade having to lead a team of vampires that have been trying to kill him is a cool concept. And even Blade now having to contest with the human world on top of the vampires is also a really cool concept. And it really serves as the actual weight to the first act of the movie. But besides the first 20 minutes, and right when Blade gets captured, Ryan Reynolds comes in and it's literally never brought up again throughout the rest of the movie. Which I think is the biggest problem of it. And he's just like walking in broad daylight in downtown LA, armed to the teeth with his fucking sword on the back, after he's supposedly public enemy number one. Not a fucking cop in sight.
Yeah.
They had a lot of ideas just being juggled, and I don't think they ever knew which one to commit to. Like, even Dracula kind of only doesn't show up till like mid third act, and he's like, "Hi, I'm Dracula. I guess I'm here too."
Yeah,
It's a very bored Dracula performance.
Which I love Dominic Purcell. I love his character on Prison Break, and he's one of the highlights of his appearances on The Flash, and he's one of the mainstays of Legends of Tomorrow. His character was always so much fun on there, and for a long time, he was actually my pick to play Venom, because he does so well at playing that good guy at heart, but always does the wrong thing, even though he wants to do right. And his take on Dracula, I think it's just a tragic case of miscasting, because even in the way that Dracula, or Drake as they call him in this, because this is a hallmark of the early 2000s superhero movies where they're embarrassed to be associated with comic books. A lot of it feels like it just needed a different actor, needed more of this kind of like cool, charismatic menace, something closer to how Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, or appearances that we would get in the Netflix series that came out from Stephen Moffat with Claes Bang's take on the character. And it's just kind of lacking here. And I don't blame it on Purcell necessarily. I think he's a fine actor. I just think he was given the wrong direction for this.
Yeah.
Dracula turning into a CGI mess at the end was a bad choice, in my opinion, as well. I mean, Dracula's supposed to be bigger than a computer game, you know?
Yeah, and also just an odd decision, because he's like, we're told that he's like the first vampire. He's so much more powerful than any of them. And in the action scenes, he's just like another vampire that Blade has killed literally hundreds of throughout all three of these movies.
Doesn't really do anything interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, everybody was pretty much over this movie. Pretty much. I mean, again, Wesley Snipes, like, there's a scene where he's on the slab there, and he wouldn't even open his eyes for this.
And that's the alternate ending. And there was so much of this movie that Wesley Snipes outright refused to shoot, so they had to like use stand-ins. They had to CGI his face on the stunt doubles. Patton Oswalt, I think, has the story in one of those interviews about the much cooler black guy that would show up on set because Wesley Snipes refused to come out of his trailer.
Yeah. So, I mean, he just was absolutely kind of just over this. Yeah, this third movie. I mean, there's some kind of, I said, introducing, this newer group because you have Jessica Biel's character, and she's the daughter of Whistler. She's Abigail, and she's Whistler's daughter there. Could have done some fun stuff there about that dynamic. That doesn't really happen much. She doesn't even really have much of a reaction to his death until way much later in the movie. So that's kind of gone.
And I don't blame any of the actors. I think when a film is this incompetently made, the blame falls onto the. And not that Goyer is a bad director. Oh wait, what else has he done? Directed. Fucking The Invisible and The Unborn. Yeah, he's a bad director. Never mind. But I think a lot of that is owed to just really weird choices, because you get a scene where Jessica Biel is having this breakdown over the death of one of her friends, and it's not shot in a close-up, which I think, if you're trying to get an emotional scene, you want to focus on the most important aspect of an actor, which is the face. And it's shot in this really awkward wide shot with Blade just awkwardly standing in the background, just repeating the word, use it, while Jessica Biel is just breaking down.
What was he even talking about? Like, does he mean use your emotions to be a better warrior later?
Yeah, use your emotions to fuck shit up, which I think is what they were going for, but it's just odd. And I think a lot of these scenes of Blade, when he's interacting with the Night Stalkers, as they're called, they're meant to humanize him, but they just make him feel more like an unfeeling weirdo.
Yeah. They make him feel like it's like an old man, kind of. I mean, basically. I mean, kind of. Like, because these are supposed to be newer, younger kids.
Which when you do these kind of stories, it's like, one of the things that you want to do is kind of show that, hey, old man, your way's kind of outdated. You need to evolve. You need to change. But Blade is just an asshole to all of these people, and they do things his way, and it succeeds completely. It's like nothing is made out of the interaction with the Night Stalkers, and it's just all feels odd. It feels awkward. It feels like everybody involved in this thing needed another month or a week to work on it.
Yeah. And here's the clip when he kind of is talking to him, some of the Night Stalkers here. That's really good.
Supposed to be helping me. You. Look at you. You're kids. You're not ready to roll with this. I mean, look at the way you dressed. But that's supposed to be tactical? What is this? What is that? Fuck you. It's a joke, huh?
I mean, it's basically him just calling all them out. He calls them kids. He's saying treating this as a joke. Ryan Reynolds, he's got like a name tag. He's got "fuck you" on it. I mean, he's too old to be trying to be that edgy, bro. You ain't, you know what I mean? It's like 17, 16, bro. You look too old to be trying to do that, man.
Your Backstreet Boy goatee is not fooling any. We know you are 35.
Yeah. And it sucks because Hannibal is such a good character in the comics. He's an obscure character, and Blade is kind of an obscure comic issue that had a huge place in the 90s, along with The Punisher. To turn him into just, all right, Ryan Reynolds, let's see some of that improv, like you said, Nick. I mean, he's not even, it's like he wasn't even given a character at all. And Hannibal, he wears like an Australian outback hat and just loves killing vampires like Blade does. And we don't see any of that in this.
And more of Hannibal King, he's a really fascinating character. And even there are like hints of it in this film, because they say that, Hannibal King used to be a vampire. He was cured. And they imply that, a lot of these fucking vampires are turned against their will, which is a very interesting concept, but it's not given any time to develop. And their end game is to just create this virus that indiscriminately kills every vampire. Which, wait, what about the people that are turned against their will? You established that you can cure them.
I mean, you're one of those people.
Too late.
He
It's too late.
Fuck him.
Yeah, it's just too late.
He's one of those close the escape hatch behind him types.
No reform.
I do want to give Goyer credit. At the end of Bram Stoker's Dracula, look upon the defeated Dracula, who is now dead, and it is a beautiful man. And they're like, oh, so he was once a human as well. How good that he is released from his violent, disturbing, lonely walk of the earth, and is now a corpse and is beautiful, etc., etc. So the fact that they at least let Dominique be his beautiful self in his death as well is kind of a Dracula shout out. Maybe I'm giving him too much credit for having that play out that way, but I enjoyed that. So
Nice.
is what it is.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on
And-
Blade Trinity?
Yeah, just outside of the script, which we said is horrible, it's full of these half-baked ideas. Outside of the direction, which at best is awkward, and even when it does work, it feels like it was an accident more than something intentional. The biggest charm of the Blade films is in its action set pieces with this intricate choreography and how these are shot so clearly. And this film, how do I put this? You remember that scene in Everything Everywhere All at Once where Shellyo fighting this one guy and they both hit each other on the head and they kind of knock their kung fu skills out of them? And it's like this very awkward, like slap fighting that they do. That's what the action in this film feels like. It feels like it was that, but they just cut around it and give all of these like 1,000 cuts in like a 30-second fight. And it's like a slap fighting. And it just feels awkward. It feels like it's covering up the fact that most of the actors here don't actually know how to fight outside of Wesley Snipes. And somehow you made even him look bad in this.
Yeah, I agree.
Bradley? Let's see.
Well, it's definitely the worst of the three by a wide margin. It's like most sequels that we get in the superhero runs where it's so bad that everyone, as they're leaving the theater, kind of unanimously says, well, that's the end of that franchise. And it's so sad to think about. If you're going to kill an adorable dog in a movie, you have to nail that. That has to be perfect. I'm not trying to say it wasn't funny, but I was like, "Oh, poor little guy," you know. Just everything just hits wrong. There's a scene where Jessica Biel's dating and being human bait for herself, and for some reason she looks like she's dressed up as like a nanny at an orphanage. I was thinking the way vampires are, Jessica Biel, you could dress, or David Goyer, whoever made that decision, she could just dress up as herself at the subway. Why does she have to put on a silly old lady costume?
I mean, you could do that. Terry, kind of playing into a lot of what the pitch was for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where we follow the like big titty blonde girl, and she gets cornered in the alley, and oh, call an ambulance, but not for me.
Exactly. So everything here it's just a mess, and like Ryan Reynolds opens as a narrator and then closes the film out as a narrator. What the hell is that about? Why is there a narrator at all?
I feel like they banked on Hannibal King and the Night Stalkers being much bigger hits of characters than they actually were, and that kind of is what makes their interaction so awkward because they're so at the forefront of this movie, more so than the title character of Blade, that it feels like they wanted to do more spin-offs with them, but everybody hated this movie so much that it basically killed this entire franchise to the point where the next time we saw the character was in 2006 with the television series that was on Spike TV.
Yeah. With Sticky Fingers.
Sticky Fingers.
Yeah. To close out my final thought on that, you go Dracula, like, guys, that's like, to quote Gyllenhaal, that's the Avengers level threat of Macabre. That you gotta go so big with Dracula. Just like you said, Nick. He's just some vampire.
You need more than just a slow-mo montage of him just casually walking while RZA raps to him, dressed as like a metrosexual pirate.
So yeah, I didn't care for this at all. I wish I could say on rewatch that I had fun, at least laughing at it. It's not even that funny. I do like that Ryan Reynolds finally found his voice and what works for his shtick, his routine, because he narrates films now and he actually is fantastic at it. Like, such a great comedian. And it's cool that all these actors, as big as they are now, do have in their IMDb one of the worst superhero films. Not fantastic, not fan four stick or whatever that's
Well,
called.
Ryan
but
Reynolds did
it's
have
pretty
Green
bad.
Lantern. That's pretty fan four stick
He
like.
did.
He had X-Men Origins Wolverine,
Oh, that's
then he
right,
had
right.
this, which is like, hey, I guess fourth time's the charm with a
Yeah.
superhero film.
I forgot about a lot of bad superhero films. This one's probably not even the worst now that I'm really thinking about it.
Nah.
Yeah,
this is
I didn't care
yeah,
for it.
it-
I'll just leave it at
Yeah,
that.
I get into my thoughts. Even watching it today, having the first two films so fresh on my mind, even knowing the context of all the troubles that this production went through, all of the, kind of like very late era of early 2000s-ness that involves a lot of this film. This movie's still a fucking piece of shit. I remember really liking this movie, but I guess I was just 13 and very dumb.
Mm.
And I thought I had a lot of nostalgia. I had a lot of I thought I would have a lot of nostalgia goggles for this movie, but having just watched the first two, rewatched the first two, and watching this so close after it, this is a just embarrassment to the franchise Blade as a whole. It's an embarrassment to the superhero genre. It's just so half thought out. Whenever we talk about these more recent films where they are very much the products of the early 2000s superhero films, this is one of the worst examples of that. And I wouldn't even put these films like Black Adam or Morbius in that category. It feels just half-assed, and it's all the more insulting because so much great came before it. This is one of my... I was angry when I was rewatching this film for the show.
So yeah, I mean, my brother said this is definitely one of the worst ones of the franchise by far there, and basically just kind of killed it there for a while. Of course, it's going to be back in the MCU now that they have the rights to the character Blade, because part of why Blade was made in 1998 was that Marvel was selling off a bunch of the rights to all the characters, so they gave a bunch of the characters to all these different studios. Now they have all those characters back now, so Mahershala Ali is going to be playing Blade in the upcoming MCU film there. This franchise as a whole, as I said, very good two first movies, Blade 1, Blade 2. This was kind of just a thing with mostly trilogies. Sometimes it's hard to, there was like a curse with a lot of trilogies. Like the third movie was always typically, there's a stereotype that that's usually the worst one. That happened also with X-Men 3. That also happened with Spider-Man 3. Just
that happened with the next X-Men trilogy.
Yeah, which they even make a reference to. Sophie Turner did. Jean Grey even makes a joke about that in Dark Phoenix. She makes a joke about that. And action-wise, at least with the other two movies, you had some good action scenes, memorable stuff. Nothing memorable, I don't think, about Blade Trinity. I don't think it's even a very good Wesley Snipes' Blade performance there. I think that one scene, the scene where he's kind of basically just talking shit to the whole Night Stalkers, I think it's pretty decent. But for the most part, it's not even that great of a Blade kind of stuff.
It felt like he wasn't even talking about like the actual characters in the scene. He was talking about David S. Goyer.
Yeah. Which is kind of a little bit of that stuff. There's some good stuff with Chris Christopherson who's back as Whistler. I like the scene where he's, saying like this is before he dies, where he's, talking about, how he just kind of sees Blade alone and nobody kind of with him. I think that's kind of some good stuff there. But even, kind of that dynamic couldn't carry this movie. The newer characters, you have, again, look on this paper, good cast, but none of these newer people, I don't think, do a good job here. And kind of very much wasted and kind of a bad directorial job and writing job from David S. Goyer here. So if I had to say,
and clearly from a directorial standpoint, David S. Goyer did improve.
Womp womp.
So if I had to say, I would give maybe Blade 1, I would say a high tune in, Blade 2 also a strong tune in, and then Blade 3, I'd give it a burn it. I would say for just some of the few stuff scenes I mentioned, some of the character where it saves it, I guess, from being a waste of fucking film. But that would be my rating for the three of the films there for the Blade trilogy for me. Yeah. So unless Bradley, did you want to give your rating for all three of them? So our rating system, we have tune in, tune out. We also have a stream it. We also have a skip it. We have a burn it, and we have a waste of fucking film, which is our lowest rating.
Wow. I definitely tune ins for Blade 1 and 2. Even though some of the, as we said, some of the effects don't quite live up to it. But I think it's fun when they don't. You know, when you look at older films and it's kind of goofy, what was mind-blowing at the time, you know?
It's kind of that thing where you watch a really old movie and you look at the effects of them, and some of them haven't really aged well. It kind of adds to that charm, I think. It kind of adds to the charm of those films like that.
No, absolutely. For the third one, I didn't like it at all. It was upsetting that I couldn't even laugh at it, you know, like, oh, I know it's going to be bad. It's so much of it is just, what story are we telling again? That's so funny, Nick. You said that it was going to be the Vampires 1 at the beginning, because that's kind of how it opens. Like, we're in a post-apocalyptic setting with an ancient pyramid. Did the world end?
And it's just Iraq now.
Yeah. I don't want to say that it's a waste of fucking film, because at least we have our answer why there's no Blade movies. So I'll just say burn it also. Just
All right, Nick.
Before I geared up to rewatch the trilogy this week, I would have said 1 is a high tune in, 2 is a very high tune in, and not just because I have such a nostalgic goggles for it, and 3 is a burn it. But then rewatching all of the films in such quick succession, Blade, just because of how charming it is kind of this perfect time capsule of the late 90s and how much it influenced films like The Matrix, like the early like aughts of the superhero genre, and how important the film ended up being. Blade 1 is this is cinema for me, because not just because of how great the film is on its own, but just because of what it meant to the genre and what it meant to black cinema, period. Because this is like the first big successful, we're taking this all seriously, black superheroes, and it became so iconic. And Blade 2, it's one of my favorite cinema theater experiences of all time. It's one of my favorite film sequels, period. It has such great action. It has such great setup and dynamics between Blade and the Blood Pack. I would have said tune in earlier, but just because of how much fun I was having, especially when Blade does go on his rampage, it's also with This Is Cinema. I love both of these films. And I kind of had a guilty pleasure feeling going into Blade Trinity when I was doing my recent rewatch. And even knowing all of the troubles that it went through, knowing that, yeah, this movie kind of sucks, but it can be charming in its own way. And the more I was getting into the film and rewatching it, this movie is it's the fucking sweaty, herpes infested taint of the superhero genre. There's just nothing really redeemable for this film to me. It's not just a bad superhero movie, it's a bad Blade movie. It misses everything that made the first two films so charming, where it was this kind of hyper stylized, like sort of grounded real world, but also introducing all of these supernatural elements, this creature feature stuff, these horror elements, having this and this very intricate action choreography. None of that's here. And it's just one of the biggest disappointments of the genre. And it's one of those things that makes me more hopeful for Mahershala Ali and the MCU's Blade, because if you can even capture 1% of that cool factor that made the first two Blade films. Because you don't even really need to be that gory when most of your enemies turn to ash. You don't really need gore in a Blade film when you really think about it. And if you can capture like a hint of that coolness, then you'll at least be better than Blade Trinity, which gives me more hope for MCU Blade.
All right. And that was the Blade trilogy review there.